Hello, everyone. Welcome to the presentation on technical platform product management. This is the second in the series of how we are actually introducing our book, Effective Platform Engineering. If you haven't watched the first video that we did about introducing platform engineering, please check it out. And if you haven't heard about this book, this is a book that is just being published by Manning Publications, written by myself and three fantastic authors, Nick Chenoweth, Brian Oliver, and Sean Alvarez. And you can actually use that QR code that you see on the screen here to actually buy the book and check it out. So today, we're actually going to be talking about 6 key things as part of the platform product management concept. I'm going to start with why platform engineering needs product management. Then we'll get into the ideas of platform as a product. Follow that up with, essentially looking at from the point of view of what are the business outcomes that you could get out of it. Then I'll introduce this concept called platform value modeling, and we'll take a look at a couple of case studies there. And then we'll move on to the idea of how do you actually make platform engineering work in reality, in real life. And finally, we'll conclude with some ideas on scaling platform engineering adoption. Just to recap before we go further, in the first video, if you haven't watched yet, just check it out on the description of this video. We introduced platform engineering. So for those of you who are not quite familiar with the ideas of platform engineering, this is something that you definitely want to check out. And we also talked a little bit about the historical context in which platform engineering came into what it is today. Then we talked about how to evolve platform engineering within your organization. And one of the more fun parts with the whole video, I believe, was when we are talking about the career paths and the growth opportunities. And if you are really looking for a career in platform engineering, or if you are already starting that journey, or if you are already in that journey, that section might actually be of a lot of interest to you. Then the most important part, right? It's sometimes very easy to get started with things, but how do you really make it stick? And that is something that we are talking a lot in the first video. Then we are also looking ahead, seeing like how is platform engineering going to evolve over the next 5-10 years. And this is always an arduous task, but it's always good to really see that how various people think. And we sort of conclude by talking about what is in this book that is actually going to help you get to all the things that you want to get to within the platform engineering journey. So before we actually get started further, let's talk a little bit about what is TPM, or the technical product management. So we call it technical product management, or sometimes we call it technical platform product management. It's the same thing. But the way we look at it is that this is the linchpin for the successful platform engineering. Again, if you have to get the platform engineering adopted and scaled within your organization, you need to have investment and understanding of technical product management. And the illustration that you see at the bottom is exactly what we actually shared and went into a little bit of a detail in our first video. So if you haven't watched the first video, definitely check out that section in the first video. And what we are really saying is that as you're defining platform engineering and defining the scope of platform engineering, there are certain horizontal planes that you have to think about, right? Things like your networking, your compliance, and your development activities, and your runtime. All those things are part of your overall platform engineering scope. But none of these things would work correctly if we don't have those vertical planes sort of identified and invested correctly. And within that, the most important one is what we call as that platform product engineering. And we'll get into all the details about what it is and how to actually make it work in this video. So now let's start talking about why do we need product management in platform engineering. So if you think about a platform product model, there are about 7 key principles that you have to think about. First one is about accelerating that business delivery. So you're building all these platform capabilities and your engineers are trying to get more productive. Great, right? But how is that really helping your business? So that's the number one thing you have to think about. The next, you have to really think about that developer, what we call as that developer load or developer cognitive load. If the developers have to think more about how to make things work as opposed to really focusing on that actual product development that they're doing, then their productivity is going to come down. So you don't want their productivity to come down. Instead, you really want to have them focus on the things that they should be focusing on. The other part, and again, we touched upon a little bit of this in the first video, making sure that your platform is composable and responsive. By that, what I mean is that you are not really going to build everything from scratch within your engineering platform. You're going to be using lots of different tools and systems. As you are really going to be doing that and building the value on top of it, you want to create a composable system so that you can really continue to evolve and continue to stay relevant as you are really evolve as the technology is evolving and your organizational requirements are evolving. Security and compliance, built-in guardrails ensuring those really compliant delivery from the start is super important because for at this point when I really look at the industry, a lot of the people are actually using an engineering platform for those purposes. There are lots of other activities like we spoke about the first three, but the reason why organizations and the leadership wants to invest in an engineering platform is mostly around how can they actually ensure their systems are secure and compliant. The next one is what we call as this independent capabilities, right? You want to have somewhat of a decoupled services with separate roadmaps, right? I mean, because if you create so much of dependency within your platform team, and within your platform team as well as your platform team and the teams that are consuming it, you're not going to be really benefiting from the assessments. So you want to have a way in which you're going to create somewhat of that independent capabilities. Uh, the next one is that faster time to value. So if you really look at that economies of scale of every developer not wanting to do things in their own way, and if there is a product management mindset behind that, could you actually increase that faster time and increase the value generation time? Absolutely, right? That is something that you have to think about. Then last one is, of course, an obvious one, which is like, how do you reduce toil and create that higher level of productivity? And this is something there, if you really start looking at the kind of things that we're going to be talking about in this presentation, the idea of platform as a service, with a clear SLAs and SLOs, you will be in a much better position with respect to your success in that journey. So in the book, in chapter 3, and this is something that you would actually see, this it's a diagram that you would see there. So what we are really talking about here is that if you look at your overall SDLC, right, say from the point of view of planning and designing, coding, and all the way to operating it, there are certain principles, about like 6 different principles that you have to think about, right? I mean, which is about observability, which we already spoke about, that continuous deployment we all know of, and we sometimes use the CI/CD as interchangeably with the idea of DevOps or platform engineering and all that. It is not, like we spoke about, but it is one of the key components. Then the self-serve functionality. This is very important from the point of view of ensuring that your developers don't have to go in and ask somebody to do it or open a ticket to do it. They can do it themselves. We already talked about the compliance and governance, then the cost and sustainability. And this is very important from the point of view of you making sure that the systems that you build are built for lowest cost possible and have got all the sustainability features in it. And security is a no-brainer in that space. So this is a model through which you would want to really look at how your SDLC is impacted by the principles that you need in the platform world. So the question that you obviously need to ask is like, why isn't DevOps scaling, right? And so, most of you have had DevOps teams, or you might still have a DevOps team, and the challenge is that it isn't scaling, it isn't generating the kind of results that you're expecting to get. So essentially, the problem with the DevOps is that it sort of involves significant amount of change, and change is very difficult to manage. So especially when you have multiple teams and large teams. So that is probably that first reason. The second one is like dependency on operations and the kind of approval process and things like that you might have there. What that means is that you really don't have like a seamless way of getting things done without really having so much of dependencies going back and forth. So that's the second one. The third one is when you're thinking of monitoring and logging and things like that as an ad hoc activity, as a separate add-on, work that you build on top of any automation you do, that you're always going to be inadequate in that space. What that means is that you should have some of those capabilities available to you right out of the box, as a default activity, as opposed to having to go think about it separately. And this also leads to the challenges where some of the frameworks, processes and automation that you have are fairly inconsistent, and that can actually be a problem. And these things really lead to that challenge of DevOps not scaling to the level in which you would want to. So now then, let's look at platform engineering, right? And again, we covered a little bit of this in the previous video, but in your within the older world of doing things in a more DevOpsy kind of way, this is the way of working that stresses on the need for cross-functional teams, right? I mean, so essentially every team has this responsibility. If you think about DevOps, developers and operations teams have this responsibilities, and this DevOps team that sort of sits in between and try to connect those things. That was never the intention of DevOps. DevOps is always supposed to be those set of practices that actually create the better ways of doing things. But we ended up creating these DevOps teams that actually created more challenges for the developer experience. So, because developers, if they need something, they have to really open tickets and they have to call somebody, they have to throw it over the wall to get somebody to do things. And the other challenge was that disparate implementation, right? I mean, so, development teams would ask the DevOps teams for things because, hey, I need to do X, Y, Z. So DevOps teams either does it for them or says, here's how you do it. So you end up creating multiple implementations in that process. This naturally leads to those duplication of efforts along the way. But when you get into platform engineering, what you see is that it's a practice that builds platforms or reusable capabilities based on the needs of the engineering teams. So these needs are collected, collated, prioritized, and ensure that that is delivered as a capability that engineering teams can use. So what happens is that complex things that every team has to think about that are non-product domain related. Because if you are building a banking application or something, there would be like a lot of financial services related things that you might need to know as a developer. But you may not really have to know about how to set up your Kubernetes cluster or how do you actually scale it and all that, right? I mean, so those kinds of complexities sort of abstracted out. Then you're thinking about standardization and compliance. So anytime you're actually doing certain activities with respect to your security checks or the kind of compliance checks that you need to have, how about you actually abstract all those things out and ensure that those things are available to all the developers in a consistent manner without them knowing about it if they use the tools, the capabilities that's available with the engineering platform. And all these things would lead to that speed of delivery, right? I mean, so that is how platform engineering sort of enabled this whole process. Hello, everyone. If you're finding this presentation insightful, I highly recommend that you check out our full Effective Platform Engineering book published by Manning Publications. This was authored by Nick Chenoweth, Brian Oliver, Sean Alvarez, and me, Ajay Chandramath. So the deck you're seeing is just tip of the iceberg. This book walks you through proven frameworks from how to build internal developer platforms to actually getting that adopted and mapping the value across platform lifecycles. You'll also get deep insights into how real-world organizations are handling common blockers, like scaling DevOps practices, balancing that buy versus build thing that we've been talking about, and driving developer experience through observability and compliance. There are interactive exercises, team topology models, and hands-on patterns that you can start using right away. So the link is in the description, along with the limited time discount code. Grab your copy today and bring platform thinking to life in your organization. Thank you, Process DevOps. Moving on to platform as a product, the key thing to think about here is that can we actually get your platforms that you build to deliver higher value, reduce friction, abstract complexity, and learn rapidly. We talked about all of that, right? It's very obvious. Now, where does this fit in? This meaning this product thinking fit in the context of your technology, what you're doing within your engineering teams, your business and products, what your business, your product teams and the business teams are thinking about, and your customer experience. So, in this case, there might be developer experience, but there's also customer experience. So there is an intersection because these three things sort of work together and that'll all come together to add value. But that area of overlap between these three is essentially that platform product, where you are making sure that the kind of implementation and the kind of ideas that you are really putting forth is coming together to ensure that you are generating higher value. So if you were to look at what is that make a successful platform product, think of it from the point of view of three different buckets, right? The first bucket is that vision and strategy. Second one is alignment to business outcomes, and third one is the onboarding experience. So I'm not going to go through each of those line items there, but as you can imagine, what happens is that if you have a clear vision of the principles that we spoke about. I might sound like a broken record here when I keep talking about the self-service adoption and the ease of enablement and things like that. But that is where the vision has to sort of try and ensure that the product that you build is actually aligned to that. Now, vision is great, but just as important, or probably more important, is to have that alignment to the business outcomes, because your business leaders, your product managers, the domain product managers aren't always going to be thinking about, how is my platform going to support it? They got enough and more things to worry about. So how is this platform product going to sort of help the process of aligning with the business outcomes? That's another key to this whole process. The third one is, of course, the onboarding experience. This is at times, the reason why we call that out is that this is at times where a lot of people really start thinking about platform products, right? Because they bring in newer engineers into into their organization, or they have situations where they are changing their existing ecosystem and they want their engineers to get started on it fast. How do you actually do that fast enough? If you bring in a tool into an organization, together with the tool comes a process and techniques and things like that. How do you make sure that that experience is somewhat abstracted out and somewhat transparent to the end users? And this is where creating that level of abstraction at the platform with an API that actually calls into different kinds of tools, irrespective of what the tool itself, but just focusing on those functions would help. So what's sort of unique about platform products, right? I mean, I think one way to look at it is that we should really try and compare and contrast with what we know as the product management. So if you really look at various attributes around the user research and technology impact and value and prioritization, all that, you can see that there is a distinct difference between how a typical product manager would think about their responsibilities and their role, and how a platform product manager would think about it. Again, as you can see, the primary difference between one being external and the other internal, and one sort of providing you with that business capabilities, and the focus is on the technical capabilities that support those business capabilities, right? I mean, so the idea is that in this case, you also need some kind of a shared responsibility model. So we talked about this earlier, where in the older DevOps way of doing things, in a more inefficient way of doing things, what we used to do was have developers write the code and have the DevOps teams build the software or build the product. And then somebody else, the operations team sort of deploys it and monitors it and all that. So taking all those things away, having the shared responsibility model is important, because no one team is going to be doing everything by themselves, but at the same time, you want to sort of reduce that handoffs between the teams. So what are some of the examples of platform products? You might be now looking at all these theory and saying, yeah, I don't know what exactly these platform products are. Here are some examples, right? I mean, so platform products can be infrastructure related, can be pipeline governance related, could be reporting, paved roads, could be under various categories, like we showed you in that different planes that we actually use for describing what the scope of an engineering platform is. So within that, you can see there are so many different ways in which you can actually have your platform product sort of defined. The evolution of the platform engineering team is another closely related concept you have to think about, right? So let's say if you have your engineering platform product team on the left side, as a step one, what you're really trying to do there is it's sort of trying to improve your developer experience, right? I mean, so if you're trying to improve your developer experience, what seems to be happening is that, yeah, the developers would need something like a set of starter kits that actually helps them start on their product development journey faster, or they might also need some kind of service catalog that help them, understand what services are available and how to use them. And if you look at it from the product platform engineering product team, not the actual developer teams, within the platform engineering product team, you see that, yeah, you need to sort of implement your observability, and then within that, you might have to think about how do I create my container orchestration platform or a CI/CD and things like that. So as you can see, right, this overall evolution of that platform engineering team is, it's going to happen almost exactly like what you see here in any organization. You're never going to have a situation in which the team itself is fully set up with tens of people doing all these functions that you might list within that set of planes that you showed you earlier. It's almost always going to start small with one or two specific requirements, and then it keeps evolving based on that. So what would a platform product manager do? So we talked about the concept of platform product model, but and then we talked about the idea of management. As you're really trying to do, you have to also think about like what would a TPM do, or a technical product manager, or platform product manager do? They would typically focus on those technology developers and architects, right? And their success is going to be measured by the focus on customer and business domains, of course. But at the same time, the idea here from a developer experience is that developers actually are trying to add value from a business point of view, or the customer's point of view. If they can't do it, even if their cognitive load reduces, then there is no point, right? So you have to really measure at that level. And the platform product manager sort of owns that complete delivery of that platform product. So I would think of sort of splitting this across four different buckets, right? The one is that customer feedback, so essentially, as the platform product manager, if they can partner with the development teams and identify those common patterns that they should be doing, that is that one area of focus. And then the second one is sort of shaping the product, right? So essentially think of it from the point of view of how can you enable and adopt things. It's great to build a fantastic product, but once the product is in place, the question really is about like how do I actually ensure that the product is used the right way. Shared responsibility model coordination is another huge part where you have to think about who's responsible for what. If you say, yeah, developers are responsible for everything, you build it, you run it, you own it kind of thing, that sometimes that whole process breaks down, right? Because then you're putting more cognitive load on the developers. So how do you ensure that that does not happen? And the quality of service is important too, right? So you have to make sure that when you have some changes that are happening, that is all well confined, and ensure that it is the right kind of service level agreements and objectives are in place. The other role, again, we spoke about a little bit earlier too. I mean, as a technical product manager, you also have a situation where you're going to be focusing a lot more on the technology and and that developer experience, right? So you can see that if you were to actually use this particular metrics, what you'd find is that platform product managers are almost always on the top right, whereas your business domain product managers more on the top left. So this is something that you could use as another way to communicate what you're really trying to do with a platform product management idea. And the working with stakeholders is another interesting one. So if you think about like, yeah, you are a practicing product manager and you want to move into technical product management, question that you might ask is like, okay, what is different? Who am I going to work with differently? As you can see, it doesn't change a lot with respect to who you work with. The primary change is going to be your customers themselves are going to change a little bit, right? So you're going to be your customers in your product, when you're doing your product management, traditional product management is your external customers, whereas your platform product management, you're thinking about more of those internal customers. So the other thing we can really look at it is like, what are the skills needed for a platform product manager? We earlier talked about what are the very specific high-level activities that they would work on. But as you think through it, from a product strategy point of view, you can see that your platform product manager needs to understand more about your developer journey and delivery ecosystem. So it's not about what the eventual product that you sell does, because it's good to have that understanding, but that's not what's going to drive the success. It's about the ability to partner with your engineering and architecture and the teams like that. More often than not, articulating value becomes a huge part of this person's responsibility or this team's responsibility because you anything that you're doing here does not generate direct value, right? There is indirect value being generated. And in a subsequent section, we'll talk a little bit about how do you actually measure and articulate that value. But it's good to talk about the fact that platform product managers almost always have to think about evangelizing and really ensuring that adoption happens, and then that adoption is translated into the value that they can think of. The technology architecture side of things, you want your platform product managers to be a lot more aware of the technology the teams are using, the underlying technology the teams are using, because without that, you're going to have situations where you won't be able to articulate what exactly is the complexity of the work involved in doing the typical engineering platform build out. The technology stacks, as we spoke about, not just the architecture, but it's also on the stack side of things. So you really need to have, understanding of producing some of the capabilities that are being used by the developers. And eventually, from a user experience point of view, you have to think about like, do I have the ability to provide more of that self-service? What do you mean by providing self-service, composable, extensible architecture? And how do you, ensure that happens? So those are some of the things that you really need to have as the skill sets for the platform product manager. So once you have the understanding of that, the next question really is like, how do you translate all the things that you're trying to do as a platform product into measurable outcomes? So within that context, it's always good to revisit, what you're doing or what you might have learned from team topologies. Again, if you haven't read this book, check out teamtopologies.com, and then you can actually find the reference to their book by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace there. This is a fantastic book. It's sort of like one of the best books that you can find with respect to seeing how our organization set up to actually adopt platform engineering. So within that, you can see that platform teams, in the context of this, is that it's a team that sort of simplifies otherwise complex technology, and it again creates that collaboration, leads by example, and essentially reduces that the extraneous cognitive load somebody developers need to have because it's sort of provided ad hoc. So then you provide a way in which you can operate your overall model with as a service model, right? You don't really need to have an activity where one team is not consuming, is not consuming something somebody else is doing, kind of thing. Every team has to do it themselves. No, instead of that, you can have your streamlined teams or your product team sort of consume the kind of capabilities that are provided by the engineering platform teams. So the impact of platform team is fairly obvious, but this is an illustration that we have been using for many years to show how does that really help in the core process, right? So essentially, if you're thinking of abstracting out in that second picture, you can see that when you're abstracting out those platform capabilities, the amount of additional work, the cognitive load that every product team has reduces drastically. It's never eliminated. It will be very, very hard for you to completely remove it, and there's no need for it either, considering an 80-20 rule. But by abstracting out some of these things, you're really ensuring that the development teams can actually focus on providing more customer value while reducing their cognitive load. And you should also, as you look at ways to make this work, you also should also think about how can you actually ensure that what kind of metrics are there to consider? Because if you can't measure something properly, you're not going to get the right kind of benefits. So kind of metrics that you might want to consider in this situation are things like, what your accelerate metrics, right? Your 4K metrics, those things are all important. But at the same time, some of the productivity and capability examples are things that as a product manager, you want to start sort of grouping together and saying, okay, is this how I'm actually going to see the value? Then obviously adoption rate is a huge one. So if you are creating certain capabilities, how much of those capabilities are being used? How is that getting used? And, is that getting adopted the right way? then go directly into the business outcomes. If your production team is having incidents, how is my platform capability, the platform capability that you got in the sprint or the past year, is impacting that? Is it reducing the amount of challenges there? Similarly, there are a set of metrics that you can really use to ensure that you are seeing the success as you are trying to build not only build the platform, ensuring that the platform is adopted. If you don't constantly think about this, the problem is that you will find pretty soon that irrespective of all the investments your organization has made, you're still not seeing the real benefit of building an engineering platform. So aligning with the business outcomes also has these axes. Another way to look at it is, could you actually look at it from the point of, if I build a capability, is that capability going to help me get the product to market faster? Is that going to help with the quality aspect of the product? Is that going to predict or prevent, and recover fast, right? From problems. Is it going to enable innovation? Is it going to be like create efficiency from a cost point of view? So these are 5 axes that you can really look at when you build every capability. So as a product manager, we hope that you will really look at any capability that you're prioritizing and adopting to make sure that it sort of fits into one or more of this. If you see that you have n number of capabilities that you need to build, and some of them don't fit into any of these buckets, you might want to ask, like, why are you really building it? And I think that is the business. That's where you really can tie this back into that business outcomes. Now, hey, it's me again. If you are nodding your head, learning something new, or already thinking of how this applies in your team, hit that like button. And if you know a colleague who's trying to figure out things like how to manage compliance at scale, reduce friction in CI/CD, or introduce internal platforms in legacy-heavy organizations, share this video with them. These topics are becoming critical across industry. Your share might just help someone finally crack that developer experience code or avoid reinventing the wheel. Every like and share helps keep this channel going and make it possible for us to keep sharing practical in the field knowledge. Appreciate your support. Now so we talked a lot about the value, right? So this is great because now you know that what a platform manager needs to do, what are the kind of skill sets that you need, how do you set up your model. But once you do all of that, question is like, okay, how am I actually going to generate that business value? And this is sometimes talked about in abstract terms, the overall concept of generating business value. So a few years back, some of us, have been started thinking about, like, how do you make sure that this is more quantifiable so that it's easy to justify to your not only to your organization, but to yourselves, right? So the question really is like, are platforms really delivering value, right? So we know that the patterns that tells you that it's delivering values, that if you have higher adoption rate, and then it's improve your 4 key metrics, and your development costs are reduced, and developers generally happy, right? Your DevOps indices are pretty high. But you also think about, like, what are the anti-patterns, right? Similar to that, what you see on the left side, if you really flip it around, you see that those are really the anti-patterns. But this also comes about from the point of view of resistance to change, right? So if you build something and you expect the developers to come and use it, and it doesn't happen, then you are worried, like, hey, why did that happen? I thought I built the best capabilities possible and nobody's using it. Then these days you also find, okay, we have this platform product management, and the platform product managers ask the developers, and some developers said, yeah, let's go do it. I did it, and they're still not using it. So there must be some resistance to change that you see as an anti-pattern that is actually creating this problem. So this is the context in which we have to think about a value model that can scientifically help you get to the point, get you to make the point that using these platform capabilities are critical for you to ensure your business success. So a typical value modeling lifecycle, and again, this is from chapter 3 of the book, figure 3.4. You can find that the way you would actually go about doing that value modeling is that you start with some level of baselining your costs, right? Fairly simple, right? So you're saying, okay, here's the cost that's required for building and deploying and running my software. Now, you should also find the cost to actually build the platform. So I say that, yeah, in order for me to actually build a certain capabilities within my engineering platform, I need to know, I need to have some costs and say, here's the cost to do that. Now, the third step in the process would be modeling these costs to build, run, and deploy software. So remember that you're not really applying those, you're putting the money in yet. You're just simulating it, right? You're modeling it. You're modeling, say that if I were to build this capability and this is how much it's going to take, and if it's going to take that much, and here is the benefit that actually is going to come out of it. So once you actually have the cost and the benefits sort of identified, the next step in the process would be to do some level of value projections. So based on these two data, you might find that this is great. Now I know that the value I can generate over a period of 12 months is somewhat whatever the number is, or over a period of 3 years, whatever the number is. Now the question is like, is your organization ready to wait for a break-even point of 12 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever, right? And if you're building certain products that really need to get to the market and start generating value in a matter of 6 months, there is no way you can justify a platform investment or a capability investment that somebody should make upfront that'll generate value in a course of 3 years, right? I mean, that is not going to happen. So that's why it's so important for you to really model this ahead of time and see if this is really worth it. Is this really going to be successful? If you implement this platform value model right, you're going to have a situation where more often than not, you will actually hit the right mark because you won't build things that are not needed, but you'll also build everything that is needed for you to generate that higher value. So if you are interested in learning more about it and testing this out yourself, would urge you to look at this white paper we published recently. The model itself is available for download by looking at that or scanning the QR code. But we urge you to sort of test it out and let us know if this is something that works for you. So just to give you a little bit more of an idea as to how that model works, what you can see in that paper. Let's say if you have a use case, you're looking at a particular company is going through an exponential growth, right? They're planning to adopt some microservices-based architecture, support growth and delivery. Now, the problem is that the product engineering teams are at various levels of enablement, meaning like they are not all using these the right kinds of capabilities, and they don't have the right kind of skill sets. So some of them containerize their workload. Some of them actually use their own cloud infrastructure. They go to cloud and Azure cloud and try and do certain things themselves. Some people require some level of assistance to do it. So the real opportunity for the platform team here is that as you're building a container orchestration platform, could we actually provide an abstracted out platform that every team can use in a consistent manner that will reduce their cognitive load and reduce the amount of time that they spend in doing things? As they really don't have disparate ways of doing it, you could also find a way in which the number of errors and the problems with the container deployments are much lower too. So that's sort of the solution that they came up with, the platform architecture team, is essentially evaluated a number of solutions. They came up with choosing AKS as a solution for building a container orchestration platform, right? So as part of doing it, what they found is that the investment that they have to do to build this platform was about 1 to 3 million. And we'll talk about some of the variables within that. And the value expected to generate is about 5 to 10 million. So in the worst case scenario, what you're really talking about is like 2.5 to 3, or 1.5 to 2x value generation. Now that becomes a great data point for the investors, in your case, your senior leadership, or the board of directors who are really trying to invest and trying to make sure that they're more efficient, to make a call. Do I need to make the investment for a platform team for a 2.5 to 10x ROI? And that is what's really going to help you and help your leadership make the right kind of decisions. So as part of doing it, what you see on the bottom right is that if you were to sort of model this out, and we have some very specific use cases that we go through in this paper, And in the book itself, you can see that the amount of investments that is needed and the amount of value that is generated, the value versus cost plotting. You can see that it sort of increases over time, and over a period of 3 years, you can see the amount of projected value that it can generate. And this is the most valuable part that you get from the model, where you can really see for yourself, hey, is this what I should be doing? And if so, how should I be doing it? And what's the value it can generate? And this is, again, somewhat of an eye chart. You find a lot more references to this in the book. So what you actually find is that you can go in and put in a lot of, within this sort of like a spreadsheet model, you can go in and put a lot of different numbers with respect to how much am I investing in month one, month two, and so on, and what is the payback I'm getting, the return on investment I'm getting on a slew of things, on a monthly basis. Perhaps, once you start investing, you may not see the first value generated until month seven, for example. If that's the case, your month 0 to 6, you have no value generated. It's only investment happening. There's no returns. But maybe month 7, you're going to get that just in 1 month. You're going to get all the returns from the investments that you made in the first 6 months. So you have to really look at it and figure out how is that going to work. But also keep in mind that this is for your overall life cycle. So this is what we are really talking about, is not just from the point of view of having something for your developers, right? Because if your developers build better products, the downstream impacts of those things are huge. For example, maybe your customers' experience would be better, so the number of incidents that you have in production is going to be lesser, which means that your value can have a much longer leeway, as well as ensuring that you don't really have to go in and build more ad hoc processes in production and elsewhere to generate value. So this gives you a more comprehensive way of, should I be building a product capability? And if I build that capability, platform product capability, and if I build the product platform capability, would I have the real ROI over a longer period of time? Hello there. We are moving fast, so if you have got any questions, don't hold back. Curious about how to implement observability across platform layers, or how to define platform value in a way that resonates with your leadership team? Maybe something like we mentioned, like the compliance at the point of change, or sparked a thought. Drop your questions in the comments. I go through everyone, and I would love to answer, go deeper, and even build a follow-up demo based on your feedback. The space is about learning and evolving together, so let's keep the dialogue open. Platform engineering is moving fast, and the next wave is already here. Agentic platforms, domain-focused racks, embedded sustainability, cloud-native patterns. It just keeps going and going, right? So if this kind of content gets you thinking, and you want to stay on top of the industry shifts, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We've got more sessions for you coming, like implementing internal developer portals, cost-aware development platforms, and real-world adoption journeys from mid-sized to hybrid organizations. Stay informed, stay ahead, subscribe now, and let's explore this together over a period of time. Now, switching to the ideas around platform product and practice, right? So we talked about a lot of theory and a lot of the models and how to implement these things. In practice, how does it work, right? The way we think about it is that we just talked about this platform value model, and then we talked about the overall DevOps indicators that you can think of, right? Again, these leading DevOps indicators would be things like your code review time and the amount of time it takes for you to do your pull request and things like that. So there are a lot of functional capability mapping that you would have to do to understand what is available for you ahead of time before you actually do everything and find that things aren't working, right? But once you actually do all the measure those functional capabilities across each of the boxes that you see there, whether it is your IAC or pipelines or infra operations or FinOps or anything, then you can really start thinking about how does that fit in with your attributional capabilities. So your attributional capabilities are those ones we spoke about earlier, as well as in the previous video. We're thinking of things like your observability and your security and your application architecture and those things. So what you find is that as you can really start bringing these two layers together, your functional capabilities and attributional capabilities together, you're going to have a situation where your developer experience is going to get better. And once it gets better, your overall platform product in a model is going to be far more successful in practice. The other thing to think about is like as you do your design, your platform design itself, right? Not just from a value point of view, can you actually create that composable design? And the reason why we wanted to call this out is that this is extremely important because if you end up building a platform product, even if it can actually solve the problem of the value immediately and make sure that it can generate intrinsic and extrinsic value in a matter of a few months, and your model says that, hey, this is great ROI. If you don't do it in a composable manner, like we pointed out earlier, you will have problems having to change those underlying architecture, right? So you end up getting things that are so tightly coupled that you will not be able to provide the long-term success of these platform products. The other thing to think about is that let's say if you have more capabilities coming, this is what we have seen every platform product manager struggles with. You're supporting 10 different development teams. They all come in with all kinds of requirements saying, hey, I want this, right? I want this capability so that I can make my next product better or next release better or next sprint better. As you really look at that, you need to think about it from 6 different axes from our point of view. The first thing is like, is there a potential for adoption? If you were to create something, are you going to create it in such an abstract level that it's going to be difficult for the developers to adopt? So number one thing to ask. Second thing is that is there a strategic value alignment? Because you might be going in a direction of a platform product, because we talked about examples like container orchestration platform earlier. So you might be having certain ideas, so this is how I want my platform to evolve. But somebody might come in from the left field. That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you have to completely ignore it, but you have to see how does that fit in with the big picture. The third one is your design and architecture quality, right? So building platform products is not like creating some automation scripts and just creating some ad hoc automation to help with something, right? It is about designing a product. So if you cannot architect and design that product appropriately, you might want to rethink about it because this is not what's going to give you long-term success. All the challenges that we have seen with software development over the years will apply here too. If you design a system poorly, your outcomes are going to be suboptimal. The next one to think about is there a business context independence, right? I mean, so is this something that we are really looking at and saying that is this capability going to align clearly with that business context? If it isn't, if it's something that you might want to be doing for one customer somewhere and that may not have a long-term scalable value, might want to rethink that. Which is closely related to the next one, which is the longevity and maintainability, right? If you have a way in which you can ensure that the capability is going to be used for a longer period of time, either through having a composable architecture or a loosely coupled architecture or however, as well as maintainability, you may not want to consider that. The last one is that operational and ownership fit. So if you have a situation in which the capability that you're building is going to be something that the developers cannot use, you still need to have 3 other teams jump in every time the developers wanting to use that, then that isn't going to be the right thing that you want to do. So all this to say, what you need to be thinking about before you intake a particular requirement to build something is to qualify that opportunity better. And this process, we are going into some examples of this process. For example, here, what you can see is that there are about 5 teams who wants to actually have certain types of capability. They're all coming in with the requirements for enhancing and adding new capabilities. And as you take it through the funnel, you have to take it through the steps of doing some initial idea review, assess, then create the inception, and at that point, you start prioritizing and then working on building the capabilities and delivering it. So as you can see, the reason why we are showing this here is this is not that different from building any other software products. And that's the change in mindset we would like you to get in as you really go through this journey, right? The reason why we have a platform product manager and why we have the concept of platform product management, the concept of value articulation, is because this is essentially building another software product. And once you get that in, it becomes far more easier for you to sustain this and to support in the long run. The life cycle, as we spoke about, is also important here. And as you can see, this is the idea of like once you identify the opportunities, which we spoke about in the previous two slides, and then you really want to model your opportunity, just what we spoke about earlier in the platform modeling. Once you start doing your estimation, it becomes something that you can think about from the point of view, okay, is this something that I should be doing? Once you've validated everything, and then go into your execution and the measurement part of it. So essentially, thinking of it like a life cycle that goes through each step of the process without really having to skip any of these things is very important. So we like we spoke about. I mean, the earlier slides we spoke about that qualifying opportunity, modeling the opportunity, identifying, define capabilities, and all that. So I think it's important to go through each of the steps without having to skip any of that. And as you really start doing your ideation, discovery, and delivery in the process, right? The question is like, what should you build? How should you build it? And evaluate, optimize, and promoting that, right? I mean, so I think there are um, lots of areas of focus that you have to think about within each of these, right? I mean, the idea would be, when you're in the ideation phase, you could be thinking more about what problem are we solving? Is there a benefit to it? Is there a competition out there? Meaning, like, are there other teams building it? Are there other development teams who are actually built it, right? Your competition is not your external competition, but your internal competition. But you might also want to see, this is a problem I've seen, across the board. Uh, as engineers, when you're building things internally, we have this idea of, hey, I can do this better than somebody else has, right? So, as a platform product team, the first rule of thumb is that you should never build something that you can buy. And we covered this in detail in the first video. And there are lots of pros and cons to that, but at the same time, the starting point should be that I'm going to buy as opposed to build everything, because your TCO is going to be lower that way. But then once you decide what you should build, you should think about how you should be building, right? I mean, so essentially thinking about what are the right of priorities that you should be doing. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. So what's the kind of change management that I should have? What kind of testing I should have in the process? And how should I communicate with my end users? Once you do all of that, then the question becomes like, can I actually, I said I'm going to have certain amount of value that is generated, but once you build the capability, think about, did it generate that value, right? Can you actually validate that? Don't just forget, just go in with the idea that, hey, the model told that I'm going to generate this value, so it should be successful. No, right? Model could be wrong. So check that yourself, make sure that it's working well, and have a clear GTM plan, right? I mean, because this is, again, as I said, it's just like any other product. If you don't have a clear GTM plan, how you are actually going to go make sure that your market, in this case, is internal market, if you can't really ensure that that is well thought through with multiple channels and things like that, it won't work. Similarly, the marketing part of it, sometimes you really need to market your product so that people understand the value. And you have to think about from the point of view of what's the kind of, if there is a chargeback model, to think about from the point of view, is there a pricing involved in it? Because in large organization, if you're building internal capabilities, there'll be a chargeback. So think about how can you actually incentivize the whole process. So essentially, idea would be to think about this just like a product. And once you think like a product, the kind of emphasis would be different for external and internal product, but that doesn't mean that it isn't applicable. Another thing we referred to earlier was this idea of shared responsibility model, right? As you're building platform products, one misunderstanding that we have seen is, with this idea of you build it, you run it, you own it model. Sometimes people think that it's all the developers' responsibility. Any problems happen, developers take care of it with capabilities. True to most extent, but it's not entirely true, right? In this model, what we have come up is this idea that app team is your developers, PE team is your platform engineering team, and the provider is like a third-party provider does provide something. Somewhat of a simplified view of things, because there'd be a lot of things that are beyond this one too. But the idea here is that at the foundational layer, you have your providers or your third-party providers, whether it is your cloud, service provider, or any of the SaaS tooling providers, or any of the other third-party tools that you use. On top of it, you have these capabilities that you end up building. These capabilities are owned by the platform engineering team. And then how the capabilities are actually going to get used and make sure that that is generating value is with the application teams. So as you're going through this, if the container orchestration platform has a problem, it is not the application team's responsibility, right? It is the responsibility of the PE team. Somewhat obvious if you think about it, but it's more than that. It is about really putting that down on paper so that when you're in the mix trying to do these things, there is very clear understanding between all the three parties involved that this is how that shared responsibility works. So that you have those right kind of fences, creating the right neighbors, and making sure that these are all everybody's happy along the way. So getting into the last part about scaling platform engineering, right? I mean, so we need to think about like you build your engineering platform, you create the platform product, you generated the, or you articulated the value, you measured the value, that's great. But once you do all of that, the question is, how do I get it to that next level? So a couple of terms that if you are not familiar with, that you need to be familiarize yourself with, is the idea of starter kits, accelerators, and reference implementations. So all three are super important concepts. The first one is when you talk about starter kits. This is the set of templates that any of your developers can use to quickly get started, right? Because sometimes getting your feet wet in the process is the best way to learn about some of these things when you're providing these capabilities. So instead of having a set of documentation in the library and says, okay, you instantiate this library this way, and set up your system, it's going to take a lot more time for the application developers as opposed to saying that, hey, here is a starter kit that if you can go to an interface and press a couple of buttons and say, okay, here is how I instantiated, I get something that a stub code that can work in certain ways. So I think that would be one thing that you should have. The second thing is the accelerators. Idea of accelerators is very important because this is where um, you have, or some other team in this case, some other application team has uh, tasted success with using these capabilities. If you have that, and if you have abstracted those things out, it really increases the confidence level of that newer team coming in to say that, hey, I know I'm going to accelerate my development life cycle by using the solution because some other team has done it. So it's the other additional value is that when you see that somebody else has done it successfully, you also know that it is working well, right? Sometimes when you do internal products, the quality becomes a challenge, and then you say, hey, maybe not sure if this is ready for prime time kind of thing. No, in this case, you say, yeah, it is ready for prime time because somebody else has used it and seen success. The last one is the idea of reference implementations, right? So essentially, reference implementation would be like that fully functional end-to-end solution implementation, right? So this is like I can actually take this reference implementation and run it, and I can see it go through end-to-end my whole life cycle and get it deployed and tested and deployed. So this is beneficial because unlike even starter kits that lets you start and create your hello world faster, reference implementations give you a full implementation of a design or a workflow. Now, once you have seen it, it becomes easier for you to go in and plug in your business domain knowledge, this business domain capabilities to make that implementation far more efficient. So the other thing to think about, I'm sure you've heard of this term a lot more, is this idea of paved paths, right? So essentially, the idea that if you got a reference implementation, you know that not all applications are the same, right? But the right kind of patterns and whether it is architectural deployment or testing, some of those things are going to be very consistent. So um, the idea of paved paths is that you actually deploy to production right away, and then you can tap into that best practices with respect to whether it is security compliance or any kind of governance activities. Then you can go and extend and customize those deployments. So your deployments might be doing something in your pay path, so you can say, no, this is not how I want it, I want to actually change it. So instead of really starting from scratch, you are actually customizing those things. And diverging from that paid path, you can also diverge it. Again, if you find that, hey, this is the way I want to do it things, but now that I understand how this platform product works, here's how I can do it. So as platform product managers, one thing to think about is you need to be really driving towards those paved paths way. And if you can actually get there, it becomes far more easier for you to get the right kind of adoption. Other ways to drive adoption, there are obviously voluntary and mandatory ways to do it. So essentially, you have to think about ultimately what value am I adding for the developers and how fast can I actually let them do it. If things are so easy to do, they will do it, and if the value is obvious to them, they will do it. But in some cases, you have to say that um, this is great, but you have to use this particular option in your your platform as you're adopting. Sometimes you as the platform team or the platform product manager don't have the mandate to do it, right? But so that is where you need the support of your leadership to say that, while we say, okay, this is how it should be done, developers are not allowed to go in and download XYZ and use new tools every day. It has to be the tools that are part of your engineering platform. Some of those things are very important for you to make sure that you don't end up creating that sprawl again. The adoption strategy is, again, the single biggest challenge, which is why we're spending a little bit more time on this one. Uh, there are several reasons for it, right? The number one reason I can think of is that lack of trust, right? I mean, because a team creates it and some of the team using it, saying that do they know what we want? So that is, I mean, there are ways in which we already spoke about that can be addressed, where you collect the right kind of requirements up front. You make sure that you don't really have you don't create some tool or a capability and expect others to come use it. Instead, you just ask them what they want and then you build what they want, right? I mean, so I think that is it. Then even if you build it, they might think that, yeah, this is not what I told you. I said I want X, you built Y. No, you might have tried to build X, but they think you built Y, right? I think that clarity is very important. And that requires certain enablement activities, to ensure that you are doing the right things to make sure that they understand what you build. So the this might look a little bit complicated, but generally the idea is there are 6 steps in this whole adoption acceleration strategy, right? I mean, so essentially, the front door of collecting those requirements have to be very clear. Once it is there, you need to have certain kinds of workshops to source and align the platform capabilities in the roadmap. So it is not about somebody putting some requirements into a spreadsheet or some kind of a Jira board or something like that. Then you say, okay, let me go build it. Right? No, you need to engage with them, ensure that you have clear understanding of what's going on. Then focus on the early adopters and champions. So these are the people who are actually going to be working with you every sprint. Maybe it's one or two developers who have got a lot of interest in these kinds of areas. They work with you in every sprint. They test it for you. They actually start using it and giving you feedback, right? Then think about that seamless onboarding with modern self-serve. So whether you're using some kind of a developer portal or integrate that with an IDE or something, it doesn't matter. The idea is that you make sure that self-serve activities are truly enabled, so that you're not really reminding the developers every time, hey, I got this one, this sprint delivered this, find new capability, it is, and just go use it, kind of thing. You should also really, as part of your workshop itself, you should really start thinking about publishing and tracking some of SLAs and SLOs by saying that, hey, we understood all these things are what you need. We are going to be building those things you need. Now, let me actually give you certain agreements on how we would actually provide that and what's the objectives around that process. So all this would lead to this idea of once you actually have these capabilities, you need to have this constant set of whether it is meetings or the touch points where you are ensuring that the communication with the developers are happening along the way and not as an ad hoc activity. And adoption through a platform. So essentially, this is where definitely the ideas of a developer portal and all those things would come in far more. Is like you're going to have multiple platforms and have an engineering platform, but there are other capabilities available. So you have to think about this idea of a platform of platforms, right? So how can you drive the adoption through a platform? So it's just some sort of a misnomer, right? Basically saying that you're using a platform to ensure that the platform is adopted, but this is where you can actually use that self-serve capabilities to the fore, and making sure that the right kind of interface and more intuitive ways of doing things will help. Again, thinking of it from the point of view of how do you actually onboard, right, the individual users, the developers up front, by talking about a few things that we spoke about earlier. Then the idea would be, okay, so once I onboard them, how do I sustain that? How do I make sure that they are not just there looking at it once and then saying, okay, yeah, this is working or not working, and then forgetting about it, but making that constant communication happening there, and ensuring that you're also tracking the amount of engagement that developers are having with the platform. Then going into that next level, right? I mean, so once you do that, continue to sort of build on it, right? So you see some successes with your first set of capabilities. Now, how do I actually map the next set of platform capabilities? How do you actually set up some of those that maturity posters and create more templates and standards as you evolve through that? So before we conclude, we also want to give you a sneak peek into the next video that might be coming up. So in the next video, we are actually going to cover a very interesting topic, what we call as the compliance at the point of change, right? So the idea here is that how would you be able to enable secure, compliant innovation without slowing down development? That is the idea of compliance at the point of change. Because anytime you have a pipeline where you're actually going through certain changes and certain transformation, you're going to have situations where people might think, okay, did I actually do I need to bring in a newer set of compliance activities that might slow things down? So the kind of concepts we're going to be talking about in that video, it's like number one, shift left on compliance. Second one is like how do you build some of those automated guardrails, and then we'll talk about more of that developer-centric integration, and then enforcing that in a context-aware way. So this would be really interesting because we have done this presentation in multiple conferences, and people love this idea. And this concept is described in detail in chapter 4 of our book. So definitely come back and listen to that video to learn more about it. So before I conclude, just wanted to give you a quick idea of where to actually get this book again. So this in all the concepts that we discussed in this video is discussed in detail in this book, Effective Platform Engineering, that is published by Manning Publications. So MEEP is currently out, and we are expecting the print version to come out very soon. If you want to get a copy of it, just use that QR code. If you want some discounts, check out the description. We would love for you to actually read that and give us any feedback before it actually gets into the print. And as we get into the print, keep in mind that if you buy a copy now online, you are actually going to get a print copy once the print version comes out in a month or two. So there's another resource for you. So it's just the book site. So it's effectiveplatformengineering.com. If you go to that site, you can find up-to-date information about what's happening with this book and how the industry is actually adopting it and how various people are actually using some of the concepts that we have in there. With that said, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. So hopefully you'll check out the description for more details, and you'll come back and watch video 3. And if you haven't watched video 1, definitely go back and watch video 1. That is where we are introducing platform engineering. Here we talked about more of that platform product management, and next time we're going to be talking about the idea of compliance at the point of change. So thank you, and goodbye.